Those rising fuel prices have really been the driving force behind that inflation figure we saw yesterday.
Yes, Kieran, it is the highest inflation in Australia for 8 years, caused largely by a spike in petrol prices, with CPI up 1.3% in the last quarter. That means 3.5% up over the past year, the sort of figure we're not used to seeing recently. It's been more like 1 to 2%, and a 7% rise in petrol prices over the quarter alone. The Reserve Bank definition of the underlying rate of inflation, a rate that takes out things like oil shocks, is at 2.6%, which is the highest that figure has been since 2014. We know the US inflation increase is the highest for years at around 7% at the moment, and the federal government will rely somewhat on arguing this is a global phenomenon, partially caused by supply chain problems caused by COVID, but I'm not sure this argument will assist them domestically with tackling the problem politically. This is what the Australian Bureau of Statistics summary said yesterday when addressing the figures. It said automotive fuel prices rose for the 6th consecutive quarter, resulting in the strongest annual rise since 1990. There are record petrol prices now in Sydney and Melbourne, and they're around that $1.80, $1.90 mark. That has to be biting politically for the government. A lot of it is to do with the global oil price, but the difference between the wholesale and retail price at the moment is about 19 cents a litre, as I understand it. There'll therefore be pressure on the federal government through the ACCC to shorten this gap somewhat, but even that won't do enough for the consumer. Something that could put a bit of a lid on inflation is immigration to address labour shortages. But we showed earlier in the week that even though the government has opened the international borders in December, not many people have come in. 1 in 6 are coming through daily compared to pre-pandemic 2 years ago. The government does not expect an interest rate rise from the Reserve Bank before the May election, but one shortly afterwards would have to be odds on, despite the Reserve Bank promise it would not increase interest rates for 3 years. This picture all jars a bit against these comments last November from Scott Morrison in the electorate of Lindsay and outer Western Sydney, where issues like petrol prices really can bite, where he said that petrol prices and interest rates would always be lower under his government.
I think that does highlight that Australia's economic recovery has to be secured by people who have a track record in economic management. Otherwise, you're going to see petrol prices go up, you're going to see electricity prices go up, you're going to see interest rates go up more than they would need to otherwise. And that's why economic management is so important now as we come out of COVID. Having secured our health through the pandemic, we now must secure the economic recovery.
So the PM in his various Australia Day addresses today and yesterday was keen to talk about fire, flood, famine and pandemic, and calling this period the worst since the Second World War. So an inflation headache on top of that, not really welcome.
In recent times, our national story has once again been one of terrible and great hardship. Times of loss, drought, floods, cyclones, plagues, fires, the global pandemic and the recession and hardship it has caused. These have been some of the toughest years, if not the toughest we have known since the times of war and the Great Depression.
The government thinks even if economic challenges continue to emerge, this can work in their favour as the party best known for its management of the economy. But one would have to say that is an optimistic view of things, Kieran.